Hello, everyone, and welcome to our newest episode of Earth Exchange Café, our monthly conversation with a pioneering writer, thinker, doer, activist who is working with the natural world and the places that are hurt and damaged and voiceless in really inspiring ways. And so we're here together for the next hour, and we invite you to just settle in, relax, and get ready to enjoy this conversation with Eva Simms and with Harriet and me. And perhaps you've brought along a cup of tea or coffee or hot chocolate that you can be enjoying as we have this conversation. And even if you haven't, we invite you to just be part of this, this environment, to imagine that we actually are sitting together in a little neighborhood cafe. Maybe if it's a beautiful day in your neighborhood, we're sitting outside on the sidewalk with the flowering trees above us and the birds singing, and we settle back for a really wonderful, scintillating, inspiring conversation with friends. And so in that spirit, let's just be aware of the elements as they surround us and as they are above and below us in this moment in our own place. So the earth, which is the source of all our life here on this planet, this earth, 4.5 billion years old and going through all kinds of changes, upheavals, settlings down, floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, peace and calm, and always holding us down, grounding us. And above us, the sky, that great overarching source of breath and light, the light of the moon, the light of the sun, the light of the planets, that place where the weathers are constantly undergoing change and reminding us that we too are constantly undergoing change. And the waters in our own bodies, in our communities. Some of us have been challenged in recent months and years with too much water, and some have been challenged by too little water. And it makes us more aware than ever of this precious resource, without which there could be no life on Earth. And we are conscious of the fire in the sky, the sun, that is also responsible for all of life on Earth, and that brightens our days. How the mood changes from a little sadness or a little discouragement when the sun comes out behind a cloud, or we see the full moon rising over the hill, that beautiful light from the sky. And so with that, with this welcoming of the elements within us, around us, and all over our planet, I turn this over to Harriet, who will introduce her Eva and then launch our conversation.
Thank you for that, Trebbe. And welcome everybody into the cafe. I am absolutely delighted to welcome the distinguished Professor of Psychology at Duquesne University, Eva Simms. Welcome, Eva.
Hi.
And Eva, we have so much to talk about. I'm really looking forward to this. And just to give a little bit of background, your work is right on the forefront of community work in sometimes those kind of challenged places in landscape. And you've also been working with communities in the cities in America that experience that landscape in a challenging way. So before I go into too much introduction, I hand it over to you and tell us a little bit more about what you're doing right now, and maybe ask the question, now that you know a little bit about Radical Joy for Hard Times, and when you think about Rad Joy and the practice of going to and attending to wounded places, what does that make you feel about your own work and practices?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I very much like the idea of not only looking at places or talking about places, but to really engage in a practice, and a practice that connects us with place in a deeper way. And, I'm a psychologist, I'm also a philosopher. But as a psychologist, I really think that the future of our planet really depends on a change in our minds, our hearts, our consciousness. And part of that has to do with reconnecting to nature in different ways, understanding how we are part of it. And, as the philosopher Merleau-Ponty says, we're of it and in it in a way, and to see ourselves that way. So a lot of the work I have done and that I continue to do has to do with urban nature spaces, nature spaces in cities, and also in parts of the cities that have lost kind of their public life due to violence. So that is one thing. And then I'm also really interested in children. I'm a child psychologist, and finding ways of transforming places for children. And that's how all this work kind of started, because I was really interested in where children play and, the relationship that children have to the places that they live in. So my lab at Duquesne is called Place Lab, because, we've been really trying to think about what place is, how place and nature intersects, and how place and people intersect.
And when I first came across your work, I read a chapter that you wrote in 2014 about play and play forts that are found in these kind of scrubby little parts of land.
Yeah.
And I was really drawn to that on many, many levels. One, as a child, I remember doing exactly that, where the place where the parents didn't go was exactly the place where I went. And looking back, I was tripping over barbed wire. There was rusty corrugated iron all over the place. It was clearly not a safe place, but yet for me as a child, it really felt like that. And that was where I played, and I knew all the little snickets and the ins and outs and the marshy bit and the boggy bit, and there was an absolute direct interaction with that space. And so when I read that, I was really drawn to it, and I did see instantaneously, maybe I see everything through the prism of Brad Joy nowadays, but I did see that there was something radically joyous about sort of, going against the grain, where the grown-ups say, and you mentioned it in your article, we build a mythology around a place to deliberately shun it. We say, well, it's no longer safe, so we won't go there. You can't walk your dog there anymore, or it's not a safe place for women, for instance. But the children don't maybe know that, or maybe they do on a subtle level, but they go in anyway because there's something safe about the wildness. Speak a little bit. Could you speak a little bit more about how that then perhaps moves into, or I know it feels different to a place that can then be managed and brought back into consciousness. But could you talk a little bit about what that might feel like to children, why they do those sort of things, and what's it saying about our relationship to nature?
Yeah. I mean, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because whenever I teach about place, I actually begin by having adults remember the secret places of their childhood, and it's really interesting. Sometimes they're indoors, and sometimes they're outdoors. Indoors, they're sometimes in attics. They're sometimes like in a closet, because sometimes children don't have as much space. Sometimes outside, they're really out there where they're building play forts in the woods. Sometimes it's in the top of a tree in front of the house, or under a hedge. And what characterizes them all is that adults don't have any use for these places. So the term I use for that, and I borrowed that from some of the Dutch pedagogues, the phenomenologists, is like they're undetermined places. So they're kind of leftover places because adults don't really cultivate them. And it creates an openness for children to do something. And I think that's kind of like that abandoned places have potential because nobody else wants them. Nobody else structures them for you. And so I think it leaves freedom for creativity in children, but also for art in some way, because nobody's going to say, oh no, we need this place to, dig for coal, or we need this place to, just make a beautiful garden. And, so I mean, that the children can take over these places to me. And that was really an interesting insight, that places can be open and unclaimed, or they can be so structured and predetermined that there is no room for children to do anything with it, like a school. It's very fixed in terms of time and space. And I think that children really need these open spaces. And they're very much endangered, but that's probably a whole different conversation.
Well, that's very interesting. In danger from gentrification, in danger from what would it be?
No, I think they're endangered, and I don't know if that is true in England. I mean, traditionally, children have always played outside, but they can only play outside when there is a community surrounding them, a community that keeps its eye on the children. And the children feel safe. They have a huge roaming space. I did some work on roaming spaces of children. And that has really changed. The more afraid adults become, the less they allow their children to be outside, which also means that, that children will have fewer and fewer encounters with nature on their own. It's always like pre-structured in some way. And, their roaming space becomes more and more restricted. And I think the effect of that is kind of like an ecophobia, like David Sobel calls it, a sense that nature is just that green stuff that's frightening, that is not differentiated, that I don't know how to move my body through it. I don't know what's there and what's lurking. So it becomes kind of a frightening kind of thing, rather than something that invites creativity and play. So I think if we are afraid of our public life, we're also afraid of our parks, of our green spaces, and of anything that is not under adult surveillance in some way.
It's very interesting you're bringing up fear, because, and maybe Trebbe, you can agree with this, that when we've practiced global earth exchanges and the attending to place course, that maybe we can talk a little bit about your attending to place, which is not our attending to place, but perhaps there's some similarities. One of the rather important aspects is fear. I'm going to a place that I know is out of kilter. There's like rubbish there. Obviously, there's some sort of behavioral pattern, which means that humans are disregarding it, and that's making me fearful. But also there's another fear, which is, am I going to look like an idiot? If anybody sees me lurking about this place, are they going to judge me in either, this is me being daft, or I'm a threat? And so people often feel quite a lot of fear to start with. And I think it's very interesting then telling that there's obviously the children then learn from us. And we're learning that now after 30, 40 years of having fewer and fewer interactions with nature ourselves. Our children are learning that that's normal. And one of the things perhaps that Radjoy does is to encourage people to feel that fear and to just do it anyway. And I think it ties in as well with art making. Like, if I do something creative, is that normal? Is it accepted? Is this an accepted place to be doing an acceptable behavior? So it's really interesting. And tell us more about what you were saying before about your attending to place practice that you've been developing with some of your communities.
Let me maybe coming back to what you just said, and I think understanding the fear is that, if places are undetermined, so if they have not been pre-structured, or if they're abandoned, or, and we don't have that much experience with it, they can become uncanny. I think uncanniness is kind of part, and I think it's always been part of nature because it's so much bigger than we are in some way. But, I think I find a lot of the fear that I have and still work with and have to overcome is that I'm afraid of other people. that I'm in the woods. I'm not afraid that I'm going to be attacked by a bear here, but I'm afraid of people. And so, I mean, I think that's kind of a really interesting thing that you know, a lot of the fear of people we have to kind of work with in a way. What are they thinking about me? What are they doing with me? You know, so I mean, I think that's just something we have to be aware in ourselves, and then just do it anyway. I mean, in a safe way, you know, have a dog, take your dog with you, for example.
Go and Trebbe, you're muted.
There's also the fear that that people, when they, with radical joy for hard times, there's a fear that if I go to one of these places that I have cared about and that's mattered to me, and now it's been damaged or polluted, I'm going to feel very, very bad, and I'm going to feel worse than I already do, which is almost never the case. You know, when you actually go and you sit there and you confront it, you find out that it's really, it's still struggling to be alive in so many different ways, and you don't have to run away after all. So that's yet another third kind of fear that gets in the way.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because one of the projects that I've done with children is a Photovoice project, where I gave them cameras and to look at their neighborhood. We've done a couple of these, and you know, and part of it was to document where do children go in neighborhoods that have been violated. So neighborhood where public life is not that safe anymore. And so they took photographs of the things they liked and the things that they didn't like, and what they noticed and what they observed. And I did not expect this. I mean, we had like hundreds of photographs from about maybe 20 teenagers, and almost everybody took pictures of flowers. You know, and they didn't even talk about them very much, but everybody had photographs of beautiful things within degraded environments. And sometimes I just thought, oh man, those are weeds next to a fence. And when I talked to the kids, they said, oh no, those are flowers. You know. So I mean, I think that even in places that are hurting, the underlying presence of nature still has vitality. I mean, and even if it's just in the rock you sit on, or even if it's in the brick wall that you sit on, which was made out of the brick from the earth. Or, you know, I had a friend, she was a Waldorf teacher, and, you know, in the inner city, she would take the kids on a walk, on a nature walk. And I asked her, well, where's nature here? And she said, oh, we look at the dandelions in the cracks of the sidewalk. You know, we look at the clouds above. We look at the ants that are coming out of the little cracks. So, I mean, you know, and I thought, yeah, it's a matter of seeing it.
That leads me to ask a question about impact, actually, and working perhaps with adults and, you know, family constellations in communities where it's intriguing to know just how impactful working at the beyond the threshold of those undetermined places, right into those kind of scrubby, forgotten, mythologized in a negative, derogatory way, in that space with people who maybe also themselves are stepping over, you know, difficult terrain themselves. And how have you experienced that the impact of working with those wounded spaces and within the wounded individuals and on a community level manifests when you look at that?
Yeah. I mean, if I think about, you know, I've worked with two kinds of spaces. I mean, one of the spaces my group and I, we have worked with have been urban nature spaces. So and we've worked with a number of organizations in our city and with community groups that agree to stewardship these places. So they are taking on these places and care for them. So I think that is a huge thing that, sometimes it's a matter of activism. It's a matter of connecting with other people who have an interest in these places, and to really kind of mobilize, and it sometimes takes decades to do this, to mobilize a group that can find a way of caring for a place, because we don't always have to do it alone. So, I mean, I think that's kind of one thing. The other thing that I've worked with is with schoolyards, that very often we don't attend to children's kind of needs from the natural environment. And so I don't know, I think they are wounded places because we have this idea a playground is this square with a fence around it and a couple of metal things in it. So you could call that a wounded place too, because nature has often been excluded from that. So, I mean, and so I'm really interested in healing those spaces so that children have kind of like deeper experience of place, and that the place kind of is pedagogically, is pedagogically stimulating for them, and not just in terms of their heads, but in terms of their hearts. And coming back to something that you asked earlier, I think when you remember those places that you played as a child, your secret places, in the woods, in the field sometime, in a tree, under the hedge, or along a creek that you took care of, that you cleaned up a little bit, and you had your little homestead there where you made your mud pies and things like that, or where you went on the lookout tree, you discover your love for places. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I think that biophilia, the sense of love of nature and love of place, we can reconnect with that. We have attachments to places, and we can build attachment to places, because I think the more we attend to them, the more we explore them, the deeper they begin to live in us as well. So I don't know if that answers your question. I mean, if you want some concrete practice, I don't know if that's what you're asking.
Well, I'd like to know, for example, with those playgrounds you mentioned, those, those square concrete playgrounds with a couple of metal things in them, how have you transformed them so that they are more, more friendly and amenable to playing and imagining?
Yeah. So what we have done, we developed a place study project, which is we work with an organization and lead them through a workshop, which is, it's basically an applied phenomenology. I'm a phenomenologist, and phenomenology is a way of attending and looking again at the things of our ordinary experience and deepening them. So, what we have done, and we've done one in Pittsburgh and one in Canada on Prince Edward Island, working with early childhood centers and an elementary school. And what we do is we have developed this process where you have a group of people that are interested in this place. It can be a group of parents and teachers, and we also did some work with children themselves. So, part of the process has to do with this group of people. You go to a particular kind of place. So here it's a playground in the backyard of the school, but you can do it in other places as well. And then you go with your first impression. What in this place speaks to you? So you open yourself up, you take the people out and you tell them, go to part of this place that really speaks to you. And this comes out of Goethean science. It's the first moment, it's what he called the Aperçu, that first impression. And, some in one of the studies here, Somebody went to look at the fences around it. Okay, what's the experience of a fence? Okay, somebody else looked at the play structures that were there. Somebody else looked at a different way of where there was like a huge tree and what's under the tree. Somebody looked at the parking lot. So people feel drawn to something. So that's the first part. We come back and everybody talks about briefly, and then we give them a notepad and pencils, and they can pick if they want colored or just regular, and we send them out again to that particular place. And now they spend time there and look at it and observe it and do some kind of an artistic activity. Sometimes they write what they see, sometimes they draw what they see, or I ask them sometimes, is there like a certain line that comes up for you? That you can draw that speaks to what this place is. And so, they kind of began to interact with the place. And one thing I found in the first, when we just tell them, okay, see what appeals to you, they just chat and talk. When you send them out there with a notepad and crayons or pencils, it's almost like they go to church. It's like quiet. It's like, you could hear a pin drop. Everybody sits in their little place and really begins to be aware. So part of phenomenology is that we can train our consciousness to be aware of, where's my body right now? Okay, what's my body feeling? The ground under me. Some people sit on stumps, some people lie flat on the ground because they need to feel all of it in a way. And then, you attend to your senses. What do you hear? What's the soundscape around you? What's the sensescape? It's not always just what we see, because I think to shift to a whole body engagement is really, really important, because nature speaks to us, places speak to us through all the different senses. So, so that's kind of part of this process of sensitizing people to it. And so, we have a number of different steps through it. We come together, people begin to talk about it. What was it they saw? What did they observe? And usually the workshop is a couple of days. And then kind of like, the next day, I asked people actually to go back to the place and look at it in terms of the different elements as well. So we can talk about that too, if you're interested, how we work with the elements, because in terms of place, there's like they have specific qualities, psychological qualities that we can key into as well. And then, in the whole workshop, we really, it begins when you go through this process of really observing the place. You begin to imagine it and to think about, okay, what is the essential element here? What speaks to me the most? What discloses itself when I look at it and think about it and draw it and connect with my feeling life to it? And in the end, what happens, and I've experienced it a number of times, is when your consciousness is that engaged with the place begins to speak to you. It begins to tell you things. Not in words, but there's certainly features. You begin to see the wound. What was it that wounded this place, and what wants to be there? So that's the key shift. It's no longer what do we want from this place, but what wants to be there so that it can enhance our lives too.
Right.
And that's really, that's the, the difference from our kind of workshop, because most, and I've been to so many community park planning things, is where they always ask the community, what do you want? Mm-hmm. And it never happens, but to ask, what does the place want? And how can we engage with that and enhance it? And make it more beautiful, or more what children kind of could get from it, because that makes a good place is always a place where children kind of connect, where they're happy, where, it changes the creepiness of the nature place, but with kind of something that's gentle. Like a simple example of that, in the Prince Edward Island place study, and I work with one of my fantastic graduate students, Jen Bradley. She actually designed the whole playground afterwards. But she did a project where she walked with the 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds through the space and asked them, what do you like? Give me a tour of the place. Where do you like it here? And where do you not like it? And so the kids, we had a little pig, a little hand puppet pig, and so they took little Bergie, they called the pig, on a little tour. And it was amazing. One of the 4-year-olds said, well, this place, which was really overgrown and weedy, she says, this place is really not good. I'm afraid to go in there. You should put a path here for kids so that they feel like they don't get lost. I mean, simple, just a few stones through that space created a path which already gave it a gentle human presence without overwhelming the place.
Yeah.
So it's that collaboration with the place, which I think is what radical joy is about too. How do we collaborate with place so that, that we can have a dialogue, a conversation with it, and that we can transform the material world slightly, gently, in an enhancing way, so that that conversation becomes possible.
Yeah, wow, that's just so beautiful, and so much in there to reflect upon. And it's wonderful, personally, just feel wonderful to hear you talk so eloquently about that reciprocity, about actually we're so used to, and I'm talking sort of on a westernized sort of assumptive kind of way, where we dictate what the earth needs, and what the really important work that we're doing and many other eco-psychology, eco-spiritual organizations are doing is to say that is the wrong way around, but it takes time, and those steps need to be taken for us to just naturally move from why am I here, what am I going to get out of this, into actually the earth is speaking. And what you just said about the little 4-year-old saying that, it feels like almost like the message was a very direct communication with the earth. The earth said, I'm curious in you too, and I've got an idea to get you here without me being heard, and you tell the grown-up to put a path in, and then I can learn about you better, and you can feel less scared. And that then is so beautiful, and it brings me very much to another core aspect of Rad Joy, which is about sort of shaking up that kind of assumption about places that are, as you say, abandoned places, those kind of undetermined places, the narrative that we've got about them. Rad Joy practice deliberately puts in those steps to even open the door to the possibility of being able to communicate with a broken and wounded landscape. And then, as we've now experienced as well, that once that happens, it just happens over and over and over again in either the same place that people do fall in love with, or they go and they explore and they feel into those allegedly wounded sites and feel the vibrancy. So it's really wonderful to hear you say that. And I'm conscious of time, and we haven't seen your Photovoice sharing that you've put together. So I'm just wondering if you'd like to share your screen and talk us through that.
Well, yeah, I just put together just very few things. So I didn't want to kind of overwhelm you with images. I do have a lot. Hang on a minute. Yeah, so just a minute. Let me share my screen. Okay, and give me just a minute.
Perfect.
Okay, so I just have a few things I wanted to talk about. part of the projects that we started out with was advocacy for urban parks. And, here, there are just a few photos at the top, you kind of see the garbage in urban places, which I'm really interested in. How does that happen? How do we trash
Yeah,
places?
we have to talk about that later.
And then, I think for me, the takeaway, and I work with a lot of students, like, probably 10 years of undergraduate students. And we did all kinds of different things in terms of working with community groups on cleanups, but mostly we did like focus groups on sacred places, for example. There's a certain way of building and creating sacred places. We did that with children. We did surveys of what neighbors are thinking about parts of the park that was really degraded, and ideas. We put together all kinds of toolkits, like for how do you deal with homeless people in parks, and with respect and love. So those kinds of things. And what you see here on the one image, because the trails were just in the beginning of being developed. So we were part of developing a big urban park that had just been declared a park. So there was part in my neighborhood. So we weren't allowed to blaze the trees. So, we had the community make tree cozies, and they had different colors for each part of the trail so people could find their way. And I always thought, here you had these handmade things, and we got so many. People just loved it, to make tree cozies because you can make it so quickly. And so my students, we just put them up on the trees, and they were wayfinding things. So that's a way, if you have a place, that you can't mark in any other way, just put up tree cozies. That's a wonderful practice, I think.
That's brilliant.
Yeah. Okay, hang on a minute. And so the place studies, these are just a couple of images from one of the place studies. And, here you saw a person, this was in March, just sitting there like totally quiet, and everybody was just like that. And she had picked like this area under the tree. This is what it looked like afterwards. So it was like a pretty empty kind of space. And, so the recommendation was that the children really wanted climbing. But we wanted a climbing that was really natural. So they love these big boulders. And I've seen that everywhere. Children love big stones, especially if they climb on it. Like I've seen that at our zoo. They don't care about the animals. They just want to climb on the little artificial rock pile in front of the exhibit. So, so that was kind of one of the images. And the next one, the Photovoice, and just hang on 1 minute. Give me just a second. So the Photovoice Project, we did 2 of them, one with teenagers and one with younger children. So with the teenagers, we were really interested, and we worked with an African-American neighborhood group, the Urban Kind Institute. And we worked with them on documenting where do children go in their neighborhoods, because we were interested in parks, and urban parks are part of public life. So if public life is threatened by public violence, the parks become kind of unsafe too. So, I mean, these were some of the ones, where we asked the children what they did not like, what they saw, and what they did not like. They took amazing photographs. And here you see like abandoned places, you see garbage, with the flies on it, and a broken beer bottle and a gun shell next to it. So they saw it and they put their lens on it. They photographed it. But then, they also, and this is why I just put one picture of the flowers in it. As I said, everybody took photographs of flowers. And one of the children had scribbled on a notepad while we were talking about the pictures. He said, "The thin blue line of beauty." And I thought, wow, you know, what a great phrase that was, you know, to think of like that margin of beauty. It's like the horizon of beauty that you even find in places that people think they're just trashed. And the second one, you know, this photograph also one of the younger children took. We did a Photovoice project where we gave children cameras, and we used this more as an educational method to sensitize children to the feelings they have about place. So we taught them, you know, we taught them emotional skills, and we taught them photography skills, and then we sent them to take pictures of the places in their neighborhood that they liked and the places they didn't like. And I think this photograph, I mean, I think it could be in Life magazine or something like that. I think it's just incredible. And what it actually is burnt out play equipment in the playground.
Oh.
Somebody set a fire.
Wow.
You can kind of see a little bit of it, you know. So it was a plastic climbing toy, and you know, somebody had set fire to it, and you know, and this child saw the beauty and
That's
degradation
incredible.
at the same time.
Mm.
So I mean, children are so sensitive to degradation in cities.
Mm.
You know, I have colleagues who just did what they call a Hear Me project, and they just put out like these listening stations where kids could record what they were thinking about their neighborhoods, and they are complaining about garbage all the time. And they say when there's garbage, it's a sign of disrespect for the place, but also for us as people. I mean, and I've heard that even my kids here in my studies, that came up over and over again, that garbage in cities and wherever it is, it's a sign of disrespect. So,
yeah, and I just, it makes me think, you wrote in one of your pieces that when we come upon garbage in the woods, for example, it's a shock.
Yeah.
Because the woods belong to all of us. And then when somebody puts garbage there, it's as if they've inflicted their own kind of personal, messy, disrespectful, dirty habits on something that is rightfully belongs to all of us. And I mean, I never had really articulated that, but I always do have that sense if I'm in a forest or a desert or a place that's wild and coming upon trash, it's different than seeing it on a city street, because there is that sense that it's not necessarily that it belongs to all of us, but it encompasses, it's the home of all of us, and it's been desecrated.
Yeah. And you know, and it's been it's as if it doesn't exist as an entity in itself. You know, I mean, I think it disregards the spirit of nature, to put it that way. And you know, I was just thinking when I looked through your website, I mean, you have some beautiful images there and you encourage people to do nature art, because I think that's the antidote to that, you know, because I think we have garbage because we don't notice, we don't pay attention. Nature doesn't exist, that stream doesn't have a presence in our minds. And I think that the work that you do really gives it a presence again. You know, when you make something artistic in a specific place that enhances the place becomes visible. You know, while garbage. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just thinking there is something there about how the radical part of radical joy, but and this kind of counterculture, which is maybe perhaps the difference between city rubbish on the street and when it's in the woods, which is it is animistic and it is spiritual. You know, there's something about, well, you know, you just don't do that in natural spaces. But I think there's something countercultural as well, where, we as a culture employ people to clean up the streets. We employ people to pick up the garbage. And so there's a systematic and systemic way of dealing with rubbish. Even if you just throw it on the floor, it will be collected. And the sort of the mechanisms of cultural sort of urbanism will absorb rubbish and then transport it elsewhere. And the thing about it, encountering it in the wilderness area which is so shocking, is it goes against all of the things that we assume to be right. But then therein lies a real opportunity. You're confronted with the trash of your life in a way that you're not. It may be somebody else who's put it there, but that's still actually, on the wider scheme, it's ours. It's collectively ours. It's collectively our forest. It's collectively our way of agreeing how to behave. But there is something collective about the fact that here's your trash and you can see it. Just because you've had it thrown away because the state or the council pays for a bin man doesn't mean to say that it couldn't be your rubbish too. So it's almost like it's easier to blame others than to say, where's my complicity, what the word is, to this as well. And I think, again, going back to Radjoy, which is also very sensitive to this, is that often the story comes up of, and in fact we encourage it, how am I somehow complicit in the story of this land, in this wounding? It may not be really obvious, but it could be something, like like when I spent a lot of time in a munitions depot that was just sort of hidden behind the hills in northern England, that was used during World War II. So I was starting to question. Obviously, I wasn't born in World War II, but the whole cycle of war and European war, and being brought up in a safe environment after the war, therein lies a sort of a subtle complicity. So it's an opportunity, but not everybody wants to take it. They'd rather pay the council to sort it out.
Yeah, and I think you're right, because it is my garbage too. I mean, that's in the woods. I guess maybe, I'm affluent enough to live in a place that has garbage pickup, but in many other places, people have to do it themselves. And how do we deal with that? So, and I think that's, again, a call for us to have a smaller footprint, if we can kind of listen to that. Yeah,
absolutely. Trebbe, are you keeping track of comments? And
I am keeping track of comments. We've had people greeting us and saying thank you, and but no questions yet. I do have a question. One of the you've written about the word unbestimmte, meaning voiceless or unvoiced in places, and then you do this work called Photovoices, like it as a way of bringing the voice back to place by asking people to be there and to participate in a different way. And I was just really interested in the contrast between these two concepts. It's like a place can be voiceless and then it can express itself through people. So could you talk a bit about the link between those two concepts?
Yeah, because I think the way places speak is not through words. So I mean, that sounds kind of really inane, but I think that we are so used to listening to language all the time that when we deal with places and the significance of places and what places say to us, I think we have to learn a different kind of grammar. And I really would love to talk for a minute about how you work with the elements, because to me, in my personal nature practice, that has been really significant. Do you mind if I share a couple of slides?
Please do.
Please do. Yes.
Just hang on a minute.
We have about 10 more minutes, so with
yeah,
plenty of time.
I'll make it short. Hang on a minute. I gotta find my. So I'll just use a few of these because to me, working with the elements is really powerful. Oh, excuse me. Just a minute. I gotta share this. No, okay, let me move this through this really kind of quickly. Okay, so working with the elements in place, I find it's really evocative. So, earth, water, air, and fire. We can really kind of practice seeing them. So, for example, if you think about earth, you're sitting in a particular place, you're trying to connect with this. The earth is also, besides our planet, it's the material element that we deal with. So get an understanding, how does the ground anchor and support human structures and activities, or natural structures? How is the ground related to the trees? What is the material structure of the place? And I have found that I developed a great love for geology, becoming aware of this. I get so excited when I see an outcropping and the rocks, and to get that feeling of the massiveness and that they're under us and support us. And sometimes that we sit on a particular rock to look out over something. Kids love big rocks. And so there's some kind of like a pleasure in connecting with that, or with the mulch under our feet if we're walking through the woods, or the pebbles on the beach, or the color of the pebbles on the beach. And and that, again, the material structure that we can take from a place. What draws you to a particular rock or something that's on the ground? That's a possibility for art and artistic transformation as well. So the earth element is that material element that we can connect with. The water element is not necessarily only water. Water is the flowing element, like the fluidity of living relationships and change. And to me, this maybe working with nature was the most important. Is, for example, when I work with trees and plants, what are the gestures in the landscape? So what are the gestures of certain trees? Some trees are like sentinels, go up. Some forms of natures like hedgerows wind forever, and they give you a completely different feeling. So our feeling life is so tied into kind of these forms. Or if you watch bird flight in a landscape, because the birds with their wings, they shape the windscape in some way. So that's all the flowing element in some way, to become aware of the gestural dimension of plants and even rock outcroppings and rivers and clouds. So how does the energy flow in a place? And how does it enliven our energy and dissolve our rigidities as well? So attending to the flowing element in a landscape and finding ways of enhancing it.
And we have about, can we have about 3 more minutes before we need to wrap up?
Just really quickly. And then the air is the sense and sounds that evoke feeling. It's the atmosphere. What moods do you encounter in a particular place? How does it change with the seasons? What do you hear in a place? And that's very evocative. So it's an atmosphere of place. And the last one is the fire element. So it's the warmth and the light that inspires and transforms us and a place itself. It's also kind of like the inspiration that lives in the place itself. How does the place support us, nurture us? How does it touch us? How does it want to touch us? and inspire us. So anyway, so these were just a couple of ways, besides thinking of the earth and the air and the water and the fire in the larger sense, there's also a psychological dimension to that.
And to finally bring that together, it's beautiful because we often talk about a wounded place being an orphaned place. It's orphaned from the cycles of life. And by actually saying all of the elements, the 4 elements, which are part of the sacred nature of this planet and this cosmos, are still present in this seemingly orphaned place, this broken, wounded, forgotten about place, still has those elements within it. And that is very, very reassuring and beautiful. And I'm sure it's just a real seat of creativity for people. So Eva, with that, thank you so much. Eva, I apologize for mispronouncing your name, and really massive thanks for all your wisdom and your conversation in the last nearly an hour. It's been wonderful.
Well, this was just really, really a wonderful conversation, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about some things with you. I think you're doing such wonderful work and important work.
Well,
and
you're very welcome to do the. Sorry, I was going to say you can do this practice with your students anytime you want. We can get it built into the curriculum.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to think that maybe what we do as individuals or as groups in with this large planet is homeopathic. We do these little homeopathic biophilic acts that have to do with art and mindfulness. And my hope is that they can ripple and change.
That's beautiful. Yeah, because with homeopathy, you just use a little drop and you flick the bottle or whatever it is, and it infuses the whole thing. That's wonderful, wonderful image.
Yeah. So the whole system,
a beautiful prayer to end with, and to allow those ripples to go out. Once everybody leaves the cafe, we can just all go and do exactly that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So thank you, Eva Simms, so much. Thank you, Harriet, for leading the conversation. And thanks to everybody who's listening, for tuning in and for being present at the cafe. We'll meet again in June, probably towards the end of the month. And we hope that our guest is going to be Larry Hobbs, who has done some really extraordinary work bringing rad joy into all kinds of far off places, including Antarctica, and who is on a journey with death now himself and decline that's very inspiring. So we don't have the exact date for that yet, but we will. And thank you for being here and for joining us for your tea and your coffee and your hot chocolate. And we look forward to seeing you next month. And I am going to stop Facebook. Okay, I think that's it. Oops.
Still recording, but I think it's still on Facebook as well. Oh, there you go.
All right, I'll edit all those little bits of things out when I put it up. So Eva, thank you so much. It was wonderful. Really wonderful. I mean, I truly wish we could talk to you for another hour or two.
Well, I wish so too. And I just think the work you do is just fantastic. So
well, it's definitely mutual.
It really is. I feel very, very grateful for meeting you and for having you influence my own work and my own studies. It's been great. And as I said before we started rolling, it is so rare to find someone who works at that kind of consciousness changing level at wounded places. So it really is very, very gratefully received teachings. So thank you.
One question maybe I can ask you, and I just don't know what you think about that. I mean, we're watching television and we see all these wounded places in Ukraine that have been torn by war. And I just kind of wonder if there's anything you think that we can do, need to do, should do, you know?
Well, and we have this annual event, which you might have read about, the Global Earth Exchange.
Mhm.
And I actually know some people in Ukraine because an organization I belong to, Wilderness Guides Council, we actually met there a few years ago. And I think, well, two thoughts on that is, one, there's a man in Ukraine who is planning on doing a Global Earth Exchange in Kharkiv, which is his town. And I think also, and they've also said, when this is over, we're going to all come back and be in Ukraine. I think it may be premature at this time because the focus is on survival and just getting along from day to day. And that's a thing that we wrestle with. I don't not wrestle with it, but it's like when is it appropriate to go and make beauty for a place, and when is it really just more important to support the people in recovering, or dealing. So those are my two thoughts about it.
Yeah, we did a project where we tied blue and yellow ribbons to things and took photos, so that we were sharing at least the psychological sort of support as best we could in social media, and that kind of just being there, just being able to say we're nowhere near you geographically, but we're there in spirit. But it brings to mind something that I was actually thinking about right at the start, about the photographs of the young children who played in bombed London after the Blitz, and how up until around about the late 70s and 80s, most of that landscape was either ignored pile of rubble, or the rubble had been cleared, but it was still a danger zone. There was maybe a buried bomb or whatever, but the children were colonizing it. And I think there's something in there to, maybe we look back at those kind of historical records and look at how do communities rebuild psychologically when their own urban landscapes have been so damaged, and what can the children teach us about how to do that? I think there is something in there, and that is very much radical joy somehow, but I don't know how.
I think that's true.
Okay, well, lovely to talk to you all and spend this hour with you.
All right.
It's my birthday today,
and I'll
yeah.
What, Harriet?
It's my birthday today.
Oh, happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Yay.
So my husband's just been cooking, so I'm just going to go and have tea now, so I'm very excited.
Lovely. Happy birthday to you.
It's been a lovely treat spending time with you both.
And I'll once I get this edited a little bit, I'll put it up on Facebook, and then I'll send you the link, Eva. So
Great, wonderful.
Okay.
Yeah, and also, if there's a way I can become involved, I'll check out your website for that part as well. And
good. Yeah, we'll join the Global Earth Exchange on June 25th. If you go to the website, you'll see that right up at the top, the link to sign up. And we have these beautiful little flags that were made by Mayan women in Mexico this year that would have our bird symbol on it. So if you sign up now, you'll get one.
All right. Okay.
Okay.
Take care. Bye.
Okay. Take care. Bye.